Dr. K, thank you so much for being on the program. I heard you speak in Atlanta a few weeks ago on artificial intelligence and its relationship to ministry activities and the Great Commission and so on. I found your presentation to be challenging and provocative,
Mhm.
both, and which is why I immediately came up to you after the presentation and asked you to be on our podcast. And I'm so grateful that you said yes. So, welcome. Thanks for being on the program.
Thank you, Warren, for having me. It's a pleasure to be with you.
One of the things that you said straightway at the very top of your presentation was something that I'd like for you to reiterate and unpack for me a little bit. Number one is that you said that this AI moment, this artificial intelligence moment that we're living in right now, it's provoking in a lot of people, anxiety, fear, concern, maybe in the minds and hearts of other people, opportunity, chances to make a lot of money. But you said that the way you saw it was this way, that this AI moment is a gospel moment. Would you say more about that idea?
Yeah, so one of the things I've noticed is, and I've seen that in my research, academic research, spend a lot of time in the various AI labs around the world because they produce quite a bit of hey, how is this affecting a society? How is this technology affecting culture? The other thing I do in order to get a cultural temperature on how people in institutions are thinking about this AI technology is I read posts on Reddit, subreddits, Discord, and other social media platforms. So one of the things I started to notice, and it's scaling tremendously, is people were asking questions, not simply about placement, right? That is a concern, but mostly it's, well, what is my purpose? If there are machines, computers that can process information at a capacity I can't even touch, right? Where does that leave me? What is my purpose? What is my worth? And I think that whenever people are asking those sorts of questions, it it opens the door for opportunities because people are asking those questions. Well, we have the answer, right? None of this should be surprising to us, and I think that Warren, to be quite frank about this, that when people are reading their Bibles and they're reading them consistently, uh, I don't think that what I would be saying about this would be that shocking because people
Hmm.
realize that. Do you know what I mean? So what I'm saying here, maybe it's not just the technology AI literacy that we're looking at, but maybe Bible literacy as well. Because if you are in tune with God's word and his spirit, it's like he is looking for opportunities to share.
Well, I mean, first of all, that really makes a lot of sense to me. I mean, I think about Paul in Acts 17 at Mars Hill, right, where he, you know, it was a time of great flux. It was a time of great change. I mean, that where he was at the Areopagus was a place where the philosophers and the thinkers of his day, and one of the things gathered, and one of the things that he said that don't wish to live in a different time. God Himself prescribed this time and this place, that he has set the boundaries of your dwelling place, I believe is the language of the gospel. So I mean, in a way, in an important way, in a vital way, I really see what you're saying, because the Bible says we're not to be afraid. We're to embrace the time and the place in which we live. We're supposed to deal with it as it comes, but we're supposed to deal with it from a place of certainty in God's word, and in certainty in our relationship with Jesus. That seems to be what you said, what you're saying. Am I getting you right in that?
Yes, that's exactly right. And the other thing that piqued my interest in really being able to talk about this within the Christian community is going back to the academic research in AI and also the books that are being written. One of them that really stood out to me was called The Coming Wave, written by AI expert Mustafa Suleyman. And one of the things he talked about quite a bit in the coming wave was how this technology was going to completely, and you don't even need super intelligence or artificial general intelligence, right? Everybody talks about that for this technology to be disruptive. And one of the things I noticed about reading his book is he was using and borrowing a lot of biblical language, like Jesus is the narrow way, the Sermon on the Mount, and especially from the book of Revelation in talking about end times. What I began to realize is this person who's not even a Christian knew and understood the Bible and eschatology a lot better than a lot of Christians. And I'm like, wait a second, this shouldn't be. Right? So because his vision of the end of the world is very different than the truth we know of Jesus coming back. He came in the flesh, he redeemed human beings, and he's going to return for those for judgment and for those who are waiting for him. My God,
Right.
Lauren, we really need to act like we're waiting for him and anticipating this, and this falls within that greater commission, I think.
Let's drill down a little bit, Dr. K, if we could, into sort of AI itself and where it is, what it is, and where it's going. A couple of things that you said in your presentation that, again, had an impact on me was that um, a lot of people think of AI as something out there, like a tool that I will either choose to use or not use, but it'll fundamentally be my choice. But one of the things that you said in contradiction to that is that no, it's not going to be a niche or just a tool. It's going to become a foundational infrastructure. You really will not have a choice about whether you use it, or if you maybe do try to resist, then you'll become a victim of others who are using it against you in some ways, right? It's a as a foundational infrastructure. It's like it'll be like the water that we drink out of the faucet and the roads that we drive on, that we won't be able to really avoid it. Am I getting you right in that idea? Can you say more about it?
Yeah, that's exactly right. I mean, in order to, we have a first, what's called, and I really like this framework, first contact with AI, and that was more narrow AI, which was social media. I mean, you can't be on any social media platform. And our first engagement as a society and culture with AI was social media, and that's very narrow, and it focuses on engagement, right? And attention grabbing. Now, the second contact we have is with generative AI. And generative AI is much more about capabilities and about intimacy and building these relationships with AI companions and so forth. So to say that we have a choice of whether we want to engage with AI or not is a misnomer because, and it's misguided because it's everywhere. And then get rid of your smartphone, don't go on the internet anymore or anything because it is everywhere. And we really don't have a choice about it. And that's one of the complications here, right? Because it's coming at us so quickly, we don't have time to process what it is really doing to us as humans and also our institutions, and especially with the church. The church seems to want to get on board, right, with let's develop assistants and chatbots without thinking through theologically, what does that even mean? And that becomes that existential crisis for us. But yeah, so we can't avoid it. And the other thing that happens, and I think you know that we kind of conflate what AI is. We just talk about it in general. When AI is, there's at least three categories of tools, agents, and frontier models, and they all have various capabilities, and that's important to understand as well. Because if you're
Right.
engaging with GPT, that's very different than Google Translate. They have very different, they're both AI, but they have very different capabilities and outcomes as well. So that is really important to understand, and that we don't have a choice. We have to engage with all of it. Have you gone on the internet? Have you tried to do anything on the internet or any other system and avoid AI? It's everywhere, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, one of the things that you said about AI is that one of the things that it is excellent at is pattern recognition. In other words, I can see your books on your bookcase behind you, Dr. K. And so, if I could plug the titles of all of those books into AI or other books in your library, AI is really excellent at discerning a pattern, and they would probably be able to make some good recommendations to you based on the books that you've already read, the patterns that you have shown in your interest. That's what they're really good at. But you mentioned artificial general intelligence. Can you explain what that is? Because that's something that that AI is not so good at yet. And I'm wondering what you could maybe say about AGI, artificial general intelligence, and when you think AI might get there.
Yeah, so that is always a fundamental question. And I can say this because any AI lab, an expert you talk to about AGI, or if you are in Silicon Valley and you can walk around and see the t-shirts that say, "Do you feel the AGI?" That's kind of a cultural thing.
I gotta get one of those T-shirts.
Do you feel the AGI? Yeah, so they're all over Silicon Valley, but so the needle often moves on, well, when is it going to be here based on what AI lab and expert you're talking to. And like I said, you don't even need to get to the point where you have general purpose or artificial general intelligence, which is really about being able to use tools and agents and frontier models to do most of the human tasks, right? It's getting much, much better. And it's important to realize that this is the worst this technology will ever be. It is scaling and getting better like by the week. I just finished in the past 3 weeks studying 70 AI research papers from around the world. And that kind of lets you know just how it's progressing. Now, some would say, well, yeah, general task, but it still makes mistakes. When we send out these agents to do our email or, other workflow processes. Well, sure, humans still make mistakes. That doesn't mean we can't be dangerous or can't be good, be good at things too. So that's not always a good barometer. Um,
Right.
and like I said, whether it's next year, the end of this year, or when ChatGPT, which is slated to come out sometime at the end of the summers, according to Sam Altman. And the reason why I bring up ChatGPT 5 or GPT-5 right now is because I think that there's going to be some fundamental shifts that we're going to see with this technology with GPT-5 that is going to be narrow. It's going to take a lot of the fragmentation we see today, which is like we have thinking models, we have different modalities of all these models everywhere you look, right? It's going to unify and simplify them for the user. So what that means is they're going to get a whole lot more capable of being unified with one single prompt. This then pushes the needle a little bit more to saying if you have this very powerful frontier AI models that with single prompts and examples can now do workflow tasks and videos and text and speech and so forth, right? That it pushes us closer. And so what is left for humans there? I think that that is a fundamental question too, is at least when you begin to look at the literature on the future of work with these very capable models, we're going to be more like coordinators or orchestrators in being able to oversee, hopefully, with these more autonomous agents and frontier models as they train agents. So it becomes a digital world where I think that whether it's you call it AGI or not, it is going to raise some fundamental questions about the future of work and humanity. Who are we as humans, right? And I think that people might talk about this technology and say, well, we've always had these technological revolutions, but you know what? This technology is fundamentally different because it is general purpose. It's kind of across all sectors in society and businesses. It can improve itself. It can not only improve itself, it can improve the agents and the tools. And so I think the fundamental question before with technology is whether it was a printing press or internet is like, well, what can it do for us? This sort of technology raises the question about, well, who are we in light of this?
Yeah.
Simply because of the nature of the general purpose of what it can do now.
Yeah. Well, and that gets back to your original statement, what we started with here, which that the AI moment is a gospel moment.
Mhm.
And I'd like to pivot a little bit because I fear I'm sort of a nerd when it comes to these questions, even though I'm not really a technologist. I enjoy listening to really smart people like you talk about it. However, I'm also aware that maybe others are not as deeply into it and they're wanting to say, all right, Warren, cut to the chase here. What does this mean for ministry? What does this mean for church? What does this mean for maybe me as a donor as I'm looking out into the landscape of Christian ministries and trying to be a wise steward of how I deploy God's resources? You have sort of spoken into these questions by talking about the idea of redemptive AI. What do you mean when you say redemptive AI?
Yeah, so that comes back to if I can, I want to set the stage for this because that comes back to what we're dealing with here. When we look at, I know that churches, and this is important, church as an institution, well, how can we operationalize this for God's kingdom, for the Great Commission and so forth? This is an operational question, but what lies behind this operational question is the deeper theological issues related to this. And that gets into the wisdom gap, and that gets into some of these existential questions, right? So I'm going to frame it by talking just for just a moment about the theological background and what that means for the operational side. And that's to say a couple things about the realities of, and we've already talked about it, but for the first time in human history, we have to set this context because Jesus is not surprised by this, not at all, right? He's not surprised by this technology. In fact, I think he's using it. That's why this AI moment is a gospel moment. But for the first time in human history, we share cognitive and intellectual space with AI models that can think and act autonomously. Never been a time like this in history, right? So what we need is wisdom. And there is no other institution that has the wisdom of God and should internalize and externalize the wisdom of God here than the church. We cannot um, we cannot neglect our responsibility to do that, right? And so the other thing is that the first time in human history, we do have this general purpose, intelligent technology that can improve itself on its own. And so what this means is that this democratization, that's the word I use, democratization of this very powerful technology will change how we think about expertise as well. And that includes expertise in the church. So I think that ultimately we have to realize that that there is a wisdom gap in this. We know how fast this technology is coming at us, right? It's coming at us so quickly that we can't get our minds around what it actually means to use it. And so there's then this, our response to it is waning as humans and institutions to keep up with this. This creates this huge gap. And so to step into this gap means that we address first and foremost some of the existential problems that are going on. I think that if people stand back and they look at and they think about their circle, right? The people they work with, their families, and they begin to ask questions. Hey, what do you think about this technology? What is it doing to you? How is it affecting your job? How is it affecting your kids? So that's the first circle. And I think that once we understand within the orbits, if you think about a particular church, not a denomination, let's think about a particular local church, and you begin to do this. You ask those questions, those more personal questions. This then I think gives insight as to how in a church, if you're involved in the leadership in the church, how are you going to address this? I think
Yeah.
addressing these existential questions and problems with the wisdom gap, first of all, from the pulpit, from the leadership, actually bringing in their constituents in the congregation. Let's have deep conversations about this. And then think about, is this, in the wisdom of God, the right time for us to have either an assistant, an AI assistant to help us to navigate this new technology internally in the church? And what do we need externally? Right. And I thought I want to think about this. If we can think about this in the four use cases, I know we met in Atlanta where we looked at Bible translation, but
Yeah.
there's also digital church. I mean, there's a lot of people who are shut in, right, who have disabilities or in more tough, sensitive contexts. What does this mean for a church locally to have a digital component? And with that digital component, how then best to disciple and have that character spiritual formation, spiritual disciplines? That's part of it. And the trauma healing part, though, too. So what I'm saying here is that this AI moment, being a gospel moment, has many concentric circles to it. And I think that each local congregation needs to think about it in that light.
Well, Dr. K, are there any areas that might be off limits? Let me give you just a quick example. Yes, there are, let's say, shut-ins or people that can't get to the church service. So you make that church service available to them digitally, and you provide a chat bot if you'd like help, right? Um, Click here and interact, with us in some way. Um, but these chatbots are becoming so good that you could have somebody sitting in their home thinking they're talking to a pastor, or thinking they're talking to a counselor, or thinking they're talking to a real life person who cares about them, and not know that they're talking to a chatbot.
That's
Um,
right.
what and if I think, I mean, I've actually interacted with chatbots on tech support and didn't know it wasn't a real person. And so I'm confident that if we're not already there in more spiritual counseling, we can get there we're probably going to get there pretty quickly. But question is, should we be doing that? Not can we? Yes, we can do that. That
Sure.
technology exists or will exist soon. But my question is, should we be doing that?
And that should question and should gets in the ethics part of it, which really is thinking through some of these competing interests, right? That's what we have. There is not an ethical issue in any arena unless there's competing interest about the ought. And in this case, right, the competing interest is reaching people who are shut in, right? Or in contexts where it's too sensitive to meet together, right? Versus using this technology and relying on this technology. And those tensions are exist. And I think that the way to navigate some of these competing interests is I think there has to be a precedent of when possible, and in certain disciplines like baptism and communion, to be in person if it is at all possible. And what does that look
Right.
like? Right? So, in other words, the what rises to the top in these competing interests is to have that human connection, and that human connection. And think about this theologically, though, Warren. What did Jesus have to do to communicate God to us? He became flesh. He's not becoming a chatbot. And chatbots and tools and agents are simply not going to inherit the new heavens and the new earth. Human beings made in God's image will. So somehow we need to think about, if we do use this technology and we do have a church that uses a chatbot, to what degree is that chatbot leading to that human connection, people in the flesh? Because that is how the world will ultimately end, with Jesus coming back in the flesh. And his church, his body, needs to follow that sort of discipleship. And yes, it's demanding. It's hard to think through this. But we cannot give in, and this is one of my mantras as well, as this AI moment being a gospel moment and Jesus being able to use this technology, is that we need to resist the tyranny of convenience. And that is a tension because as human nature, we want to take the easy way sometimes.
Yeah, exactly. And AI is going to make a lot of hard things easy, and a lot of easy things will be um, just too hard to pass up, right? I mean, once they become
Right.
easy, we're just gonna default to them. Yeah. So no, I get that loud and clear. Another, if I could pivot a little bit in our conversation, Dr. K, because one of the things that we do here at Ministry Watch is try to help Christian donors be more discerning about and faithful in their own personal charity and philanthropy. How, in other words, how can they be faithful stewards of the resources God has entrusted to them? And you showed a video whenever you spoke in Atlanta, called "We're Cooked," and it was a video, and I'll link to this video in the show notes for people who are listening. But let me just say real quickly, it was a video that was generated completely with AI. The people were not real. The settings were not real. It was humorous. It was compelling, and I didn't know it wasn't real until the at the end of the video. It
Right.
said it wasn't real. This was completely generated by AI, and I started thinking to myself, "Oh my goodness." Warren Smith could form a ministry in a completely fake, a completely mythical ministry, saying that I'm bringing the gospel to India or Asia or Africa, and I could have Franklin Graham or Dr. K, completely fabricated, giving me all these great testimonials about how, I've known Warren Smith for 100 years and he's doing great work in India. You should give money. I mean, the opportunities for deep fake and fraud in the charity and philanthropy area suddenly just came alive to me when I saw that video. How do we guard against that?
Yeah, and that those are difficult questions. And if you remember, one of the sort of metaphors and analogies I gave on this was being a teller, right? Because there are so many deep fakes, and there's so many ways to counterfeit today by the use of AI. And we saw that as an example, and We're Cooked. I mean, that's
Yep.
just all prompt generated. And
Yeah.
that is really something to grapple with about how good fakes are becoming. So one of the first things we had to do, and this is really it goes back to the 90s, as a bank teller, the very first thing you had to do was they gave you $100 bill. You had to go back in the back for 3 hours and study that $100 bill. The real $100 bill, front and back, every little line and tittle in it and picture. We had to know it because when fakes came, there were too many fakes, even then, right, of counterfeit money, that the only way that we could discern what was true and what wasn't is that we knew the original and we knew the truth so much better. So I
Yeah.
think that that is a fundamental question. And that gets back to what I mentioned right at the very beginning about
Exactly.
about Bible literacy, right?
Yep.
And at the end of the day, though, when we speak about the wisdom gap, when we speak about misalignment, when we speak about untruth and unreal, immediately, for those of us who know our Bible and know it well and know God's word and his spirit who guides us, knows that that deception began in the garden. That's where the wisdom gap began. And so we have three sorts of crises going on right now with this sort of AI moment. And that is a truth crisis, which we are talking about, that anyone can edit reality. We see that in We're Cooked. We have an identity crisis going on when machines think better than humans. What is that raising? It's like, yeah, that's a great opportunity for the gospel. We have a purpose crisis as well. When efficiency can take the place of wisdom and meaning. And it's hard to pursue wisdom. And so, what I would say to donors, and I think about myself as a donor, as a Christian, as a donor myself, and I donate to lots of ministries. One of the first things I do in I think about myself stepping into that wisdom gap where I know the truth about Jesus, I know the Bible, I go to church, I practice the disciplines, right? I know humans, and I understand what sin and fallen is and how it's being expressed now in this new technology. And I also understand as well that this technology to some degree. And so I know Jesus, humans, and the technology. Those are my three responsibilities in dealing with these crises. And so what that means is that I have a set of questions when I'm in the wisdom gap along these crises. And if a ministry, that I'm going to donate to, I need to know that they know their Bible and that they're following Jesus. Right? And they know and understand what it means to be a human and a redeemed human. That's the redemptive part, too, of stepping into this. And that they know and understand the technology and what it's doing. So that helps me to have a set of questions for where I'm going to be a good steward of my
Yeah.
money. But Warren, that also does demand of us as donors. We can't get around that. And let me say one other thing, um, and I don't think that the Christian community is thinking as much about this. And I'm bringing this up simply because, and this is just since I spoke just a couple weeks ago. And I'm writing a white paper because we're looking at some design sprints to do for the church and developing more product that really focuses on the Great Commission. C.S. Lewis, I don't know, you know the great C.S. Lewis. He wrote this, and he wrote quite a bit. He was quite prolific, but he wrote an essay called "Meditation in a Tool Shed." Are you familiar with that one?
Oh yeah. Yep.
Yeah, so when he was in there, there was this beam of light that he would look at, and then there was looking along. So when you're looking at something, you're looking at the beam of light. And when you're looking at the beam of light, it's like analyzing that thing. And I think that today, so what we're really good at, what the experts are really good at is analyzing and understanding AI technology. So, right, that's looking at it. That's going to give us a whole understanding of pattern recognition, what it can do, the we're cooked, right? But the one thing that we are not focusing on, and we really need to, is looking along. Because when Lewis stepped in and looked along, he was able to look up in that beam and he could see the world through that light, right? And he could see the trees and the leaves and the world that it was being revealed. So in both ways, this technology, right, we have to understand it. But we also have to understand that when we're looking at it or along it, it reveals something about us. It is like a mirror. So when these machines and when these neural networks deceive, as they are, the more powerful they become, the better they are at deception. And think about Genesis 3 on this. Um, at the same time, though, that they are just mirroring our fallenness back to us when they deceive, because right at the very beginning in Genesis 3, that is what got us, and it compromised wisdom. The other thing it shows us when people turn to chat or Claude about their mental health issues or their trauma issues instead of turning to humans, because they are much more, they listen better, they're less judgmental, they're always available. That's also showing a bit of our goodness because it's trained on our human data. So I think that we need to think about this technology in both ways. We need to know it and understand its pattern recognition and neural networks, but we also have to understand it as a mirror. And this is exactly how I think the AI moment is a gospel moment shaping us, because it mirrors back to us our fallenness and our need. So that's the other piece. So if I'm going to donate these are the sorts of questions I'm going to ask too. How do you understand? How is this technology mirroring back to us who we are and what we need, right? And it's not that we need more convenience and more operational product. It does show us our need for a savior.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
this is the way I think that God is using it. So that's what I would say. And here again, it's going to be demanding because it demands us to know our Bible, to know us as humans, and to know and understand this technology.
Yeah. Well, Dr. K, that's a good word, I think, for us to end on. I've got, as the old saying goes, we've caught more fish than will fit into my frying pan. But but you have definitely gotten me thinking about so many issues that even just a couple of weeks ago I wasn't thinking about. So I'm grateful for that. I'm hoping it'll be the same for our listeners. And I'm going to include that We're Cooked video in the show notes, and I'll also include a link to for our listeners on how they can find you and FaithWorks and
FaithTech, yes, yes,
some of
that's
the
great.
other projects that you are or have been working with in the past. So, Dr. K, thanks so much for being on the program. God bless you, and look forward to reading that white paper when you get it finished.
All right, great. Thanks, Warren. I appreciate it.